Welcome to the Capital Forum Antitrust Interview Series sponsored by Kroll on Track. I'm Nate Soderstrom. I'm here today with Lisl Dunlop. Lisl is a partner in the New York office of Manatt, Phelps, and Phillips. Lisl, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to talk a bit about healthcare provider mergers, consolidation. Certainly a hot topic. We've seen recently in a couple cases, and Phoebe Putney is one, more recently Cable, St. Mary's in West Virginia, where you've had states and you've had the FTC look at a given provider merger. In both those situations, the states were okay with the deal. The FTC wasn't, which is interesting. It seems like you see more divergence between the states and the FTC on the provider side than really anywhere else. I'm wondering, why do you think that's the case? Why would states and the FTC come to different conclusions on these deals?
Yeah, I don't know that they're necessarily coming to completely different conclusions on the merits, but I think where they really diverge is what can we do about the issue. I think the states have a kind of broader array of concerns than the FTC does. Recently, Julie Brill issued a dissent in relation to a comment the FTC was making about particular state action. And she commented that, in states you're not only concerned with pure competition issues, you're concerned with access to care for low-income people, particularly in rural areas, and there's just this greater array of social concerns in addition to competition that the states are grappling with. And so what you see in something like the Cabell-Huntington deal is, there were definitely competition issues there. The parties talked to the West Virginia AG. They negotiated a fairly extensive and detailed agreement with the AG. So that included all kinds of price caps and commitments and things like that.
So these tend to be behavioral commitments rather than anything structural.
You will see more of that. Generally, the kinds of deals we're talking about here are, two hospitals, right? There's not really much structural you can do there other than stop the deal, which is what the FTC wants to do. The FTC is, dead against behavioural remedies in these types of situations. They're on the record numerous times as saying so, and it's borne out in their practice. And if you're not dealing with a hospital system plus a hospital system where you might be able to hive off some of the assets, these deals are really up or down. Right. So the states are recognising that there are competition issues with the deal, and they're concerned about them, but they feel that they're in a better position to be able to manage them through behavioural undertakings and continued monitoring, which they're in a position to do because they not only have the antitrust legal capacity through the AG, they also have the Department of Health or whatever health authority they have in the state, which is going to be able to have a continuing monitoring role over the entities. So that I think that's the dynamic I think that you're seeing.
That's an interesting point, but it makes a lot of sense. Another area where the states and the FTC have diverged are the certificate of need laws, regulations. I know the FTC has been very outspoken on these and said, look, they're anti-competitive, they prevent entry, they prevent expansion, all these types of things. States seem to some extent, to stick by these. Two questions. A, is there a pro-competitive argument for certificate of need laws? And secondly, and this may get more to the point, are there non-competition goals the states feel that they can fulfill through certificate of need in requiring them?
Again, I really think it's the latter. I think certificate of need laws are gradually being eroded over time. There was a period where states were very prescriptive about how they wanted to organise their healthcare systems, and they, universally put these laws into place. And I think over time the FTC has been very effective in its advocacy, and these laws have been chipped away at. I think that you have seen parties take advantage of them for anti-competitive reasons. Phoebe Putney was a case in point. The way that one ended up was kind of odd, and clearly there was some political lobbying to do with the certificate of need laws that really stymied the FTC's efforts to get a remedy in that case, because they had actually won on the merits. They wanted assets to be spun off. They should have been able to achieve that, and yet the certificate of need laws were utilised to prevent a party that was actually standing ready, willing and able to buy those assets from acquiring them. So, you know, I really do have a lot of sympathy with the FTC's position there, and you know, I think from a competitive standpoint, they are a little hard to defend. But again, you have these other goals that the states are seeking to meet with all of their healthcare policy, and competition is a part of that, but it's not necessarily, well, certainly not the only part, and it's not necessarily the prime goal.
Right.
And so in instituting certificate of need requirements and certifying beds and things like that, they're trying to manage, you know, capacity, location, you know, make sure that you know, there are sufficient incentives and sufficient business really to keep entities going, you know, that might otherwise fail.
Interesting. More generally, the FTC has pursued full stop injunctions and I believe 3 provider mergers in the past 6 months, really in November, December. Really, I think an unprecedented wave of challenges there. What do you see driving that? Why this wave of litigation? Why now?
Well, I think the FTC would say, you know, it's really the cases that come to us, you know, and I think the fact that you have 3 on a similar time track is really coincidence. I don't think that you can say that suddenly the FTC decided that, you know, 2015 was going to be the year of the hospital challenge.
Right.
But, you know, and you had 3 different parties quite separately and independently, you know, doing transactions at around the same time frame, and the FTC, very, very busy, reviewing all 3 of them and coming to kind of similar conclusions in each of the locations. But, you know, I think as a general matter, the FTC has become incredibly aggressive in the hospital merger space. I mean, there was a period of time, you know, through the 1990s, I think, you know, 80s, 90s, where they were just very unsuccessful. And the DOJ was bringing hospital cases as well and also losing them.
It was 6 in a row or 7
it was
in a row
terrible.
or something. Yeah.
And so at that time, there was a lot of consolidation. A lot of deals went ahead, and that probably wouldn't today. Then I think the big turning point was, of course, Evanston, where the FTC took that matter through a Part 3 trial and won on appeal. Now, of course, by the time they actually got their decision and everything was settled that, yes, the FTC was right, the eggs were pretty well scrambled, and they instituted a behavioural remedy there, which, you know, arguably has not been entirely successful. And so since that time, I think the FTC has a very well-developed process and you know, set of standards that the courts have accepted, right. And so they've been successfully prosecuting, you know, several cases. Right. So you had ProMedica, you had St. Luke's, right. And then coincidentally 3 at once, but now you have these 3 cases, and Phoebe Putney, of course, as well.
Right. And especially when you talk about St. Luke's, talk about ProMedica, I mean, these are victories not just at the district court level, but also at the appellate level.
That's right.
That has to give the FTC a certain level of confidence that when they go after some of these deals, you know, they're on firm footing.
Absolutely.
Legal perspective.
And I think the FTC also feels that it's its duty to push the envelope a little bit on some of this stuff. I mean, even I think there's a good amount of economic evidence out there of studies on the impacts of hospital consolidation. And so on a strictly competition basis, you know, the FTC is fairly secure in its mission that, you know, it needs to look closely at this kind of consolidation and stop it in its tracks where it's going to exceed, you know, their thresholds. And so, you know, they will push the envelope on cases. I've heard someone, I think maybe Debbie Feinstein, say if they're not losing the occasional case, you know, they're not doing their job. So,
right.
So they're going to be aggressive and they're going to bring cases.
Right, that certainly makes sense. I'm glad you mentioned the economic evidence around provider consolidation. There seems to be quite a bit out there, and the link between, I guess, concentration, consolidation, and price effects seems to be fairly well established at this point, I would say. Certainly maybe other conflicting studies. I'm wondering how, if you have a provider merger, you walk into the FTC or a state AG, you know, how do you push back against the idea, look, we have this evidence out there, consolidation has price effects. How do you overcome that?
I think the way to defend an individual transaction is on the individual merits. I mean, certainly there's plenty of, Marty Gaynor, Limor Daphne, various other economists out there who are doing studies that draw generalizations that, consolidation bad. Consolidation leads to price effects. Commercial insurers will end up paying more for them. But each deal is different, and each transaction is going to have its own issues in terms of what the draw area for the hospitals are, what the actual services being provided are, what the financial conditions are. Is one hospital, for example, is it a safety net hospital? Is it serving, Medicare patients or Medicaid patients, where the state is actually setting the reimbursements, and aggregating, consolidating on that level is not going to lead to any price effects because they're just not going to have market power in that area. So that every transaction you encounter is going to have its own special facts and its own special drivers. And so I think that's how you get away from these generalizations that are being drawn.
And that certainly makes sense. Another point that I know people have brought up is the argument that, and you wouldn't necessarily concede that a deal would have price effects.
Of course not.
But and certainly you never should. But the importance of quality of care, which I guess would maybe be an efficiency or maybe be something that would be evaluated separately. But the idea that look, this deal may or may not have price effects, but there are going to be these kind of quality of care improvements, which are certainly important. I know the agency to some extent has rejected those claims in some areas, but it seems to me to be something that's going to become perhaps increasingly important going forward in some of these deals.
Yeah, I mean, certainly efficiency arguments and quality of care improvement arguments are really a lot of the time what is driving the transaction in the first place. I don't think I've seen any transaction where the only reason to do the deal is to get prices up. I mean, that just doesn't happen. For the most part, hospital executives I meet are genuinely concerned about their continuity of care, how to continue to serve patients who have special needs, to continue operating because so many of them are under severe cost constraints. And so the quality of care issue is always a really big point. I think the problem with the cases that we see, like St. Luke's, for example, is once you get to the court and you're arguing quality of care, there is a skepticism about whether that's going to offset the competitive impact of a transaction. And on a strict, efficiencies, countervailing of impact type analysis, that may not be effective if your transaction is otherwise, found to be anti-competitive. I think you have a better opportunity at the agency level to talk about those kind of efficiencies and the broader pro-competitive impacts of the transaction. And certainly at the state level, the states are going to be looking at that and they're going to be concerned about that.
Right. And I know, and I think people point to ProMedica in particular, that seemed like that case was really about market structure, and these arguments about efficiencies, quality of care just didn't kind of win the day in court.
Right.
Last question, I think an important question. What is the impact of the Affordable Care Act, if any, in the way the FTC, or frankly the states, are looking at these deals? I think it was the St. Luke's court that said, look, the Affordable Care Act, is not going to excuse an anti-competitive merger. I think the agency has been very clear about that. That said, the ACA obviously changes the, provider and payer landscape for that matter. What impact do you see the Affordable Care Act? Does it provide avenues for provider consolidation that would improve quality of care, wellness, those types of things? Can you make that argument, and what kind of impact do you see there?
Well, clearly the argument that the ACA made me do it doesn't work. The FTC's been very clear about that. The St. Luke's Court was very clear about that. I think an argument that, we really had to do this because of the incentives and drivers of the ACA is not going to work in any merger defence. But there's absolutely no doubt that the conditions that the ACA has established are driving hospitals to mergers and maybe into less less significant collaboration. So, you know, they might not merge completely, but they might do an ACO or something like
Right.
that, which I think the FTC would kind of prefer coming out of some of this stuff.
The big argument I hear, and I think maybe DOJ has said this, is look, we've never challenged an ACO as being anti-competitive. So there seems to be an argument that these forms of collaboration that don't involve actual.
But having said that, you know, and the ACA is driving a lot of that kind of change as well. I mean, in New York State, for example, we have the DSRIP program, Delivery Reform Incentive Payments, I think it stands for, which is driving groups of providers to collaborate in ACOs or preferred provider systems to get the benefit of government funding for Medicaid programs. And the entire aim of, you know, forming these collaborations is to create, develop targets and create you know, ways for the hospitals to collaborate on, you know, how best to deliver care to people and to get continuity of care between, you know, a tertiary hospital and a community health centre. Now, on one view, that's market allocation. You know, they're deciding that, you know, a patient's going to go to a particular place. On the other hand, that's really efficient, and it also is going to deliver a much better patient experience. So I think that, you know, all of these things are being encouraged by the ACA, and you know, so it's definitely having an impact on the activity that we're seeing out there.
Absolutely, and very interesting. Perfect. I think with that, we'll wrap up. Lisl, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Okay.